Thanks so much, Director Weiss, and thank you and welcome back to the afternoon sessions. We've had fantastic presentations this morning by Drs. Zach Mercurio and Christy Bethel, and Dr. Laura Papard really laid out the critical importance of connection with youth and described the key elements of the health promoting relationships paradigm and introduce you to the new toolkit that we've just released. And now it's my pleasure to bring on a wonderful panel to discuss in very practical terms, applied terms, how we might bring this health promoting relationships idea to life in different contexts in which adults interact with youth. How can we think more deeply and intentionally about how we're showing up for youth and how we can adopt this way of being that Laura described? So let me introduce our panelists for this session. First, we're joined by Heather Araya, an artist and community public health leader, founder and director of Monster Soup Society, a youth-led public health coalition. She's worked in the field of public health for over 2 decades, overseeing prevention efforts for Oklahoma's substance use block grant and working with over 40 community-based coalitions. Heather is a mom to a fantastic teen, and notably, she helped us design the beautiful figure that depicts the health promoting relationships paradigm that Laura shared this morning, and that's contained in your toolkit. So welcome, Heather. We're so grateful for your thoughts and ideas. You've been so generous with sharing with us. Our next panelist is Chief Adrian Vasquez of the Colorado Springs Police Department. He's been with the CSPD since 1995 as a patrol officer, working in vice and narcotics, violent crimes, and victim advocacy. He was promoted to lieutenant, deputy chief, and ultimately appointed chief of police for the Colorado Springs Police Department in 2022. Under his leadership, the department operates a number of really incredible programs that embody the spirit of intentionally fostering connection with youth. These include the Chief's Advisory Council, the School Resource Officer Program, the Teen Academy, and Play COS, Colorado Springs. Welcome, Chief Vasquez. Next, we're joined by Dr. Brittany Cooper, Professor of Human Development at Washington State University, where she serves as Youth and Family Extension Specialist and graduate faculty in the Prevention Science PhD program. Brittany has been studying evidence-based parenting and family strengthening programs for over a decade and is a parent herself. Welcome, Dr. Cooper. And finally, Carla Hilliard, a high school English teacher from Spring Mills High School in West Virginia, with 20 years of experience in education. She also serves as the advisor of the school's youth coalition and coordinates the school's social emotional learning programs. Thank you, Carla, for joining us again. I think you spoke during our 2022 National Summit as well, so thank you for coming back. So thank you so much to our panelists for joining us today and to offer your valuable perspective and ideas. So let me start by offering each of you an opportunity to just share your reactions and your big takeaways from each of your 4 perspectives: educator, law enforcement, parent, and community coalition. We heard in this morning's session about what it means to be a trusted adult for youth, about specific facilitators of connection that strengthen our bonds with youth through our everyday words and actions and the environments that we create. So when you think about those opportunities through the lens of each of your roles, parent, law enforcement, educator, community coalition leader, what stands out most to you as the opportunities to seize those moments in our words, our actions, and the environments we create for youth? Heather, do you mind getting us started?
No, that would be great. So several things come to mind when I think about the work that we do in our community coalition, because our coalition is youth-led, and they not only design the strategies, but they are the change agents and the implementers of those strategies out in the community. So we are asking a lot of volunteerism and leadership from them. So a big one that stands out to me is the facilitator of nurturance. I think that's my main goal as the adult, is to build their capacity as leaders and ultimately to change their belief that they can influence their life and their health, and to help their peers also cultivate that belief. Another big one is full presence. Just making sure that I usually, like, we meet in the evenings and we've all had a really long day. We've all had lots of deadlines. And so trying to cultivate that time to put the phone down, to make eye contact with each of them, to acknowledge each of them, which can be a challenge within a room full of teens because sometimes there's a lot of energy going on at once, but trying to make sure I give each of them moments of full presence. Um, I will say too that I think it's actually maybe counterintuitively us as adults that struggle to put our phones away. I find that there's more adults who have their phones at our meetings than our youth are apt to be on their phones, which is interesting. That's the opposite of what I thought it would be. So us modeling that full presence, I think, is key. And then another last one is authenticity. They've been labeled the anxious generation. And so when we ask them to go out in the world and do public speaking and they take on these leadership roles, there's a lot of anxiety. And so one thing that we're constantly talking about is it's more important to be passionate and sincere than perfect. So we're constantly speaking that into them. Like, it's not, you don't have to be without error. You just need to go and be your authentic self and just show up for this cause.
Fantastic. Chief Vasquez, would you mind offering your thoughts from the law enforcement perspective?
Well, absolutely. Thank you for having all of us here. This is such a great opportunity to talk about this really important topic. I think it's vital for law enforcement to build a culture around interactions with our entire community, but around our youth is something that's very important to me. And culture is hard to build as the organization is bigger and the job that we do. And I often joke with our fire chief that everybody loves firefighters, but police officers are coming to a call for service, to an interaction for different reasons. So building that culture within the organization can be difficult, but it is vital to do that. When I talk with our officers, I love hearing that they consider every single call for service as an opportunity to positively engage with our community and oftentimes our youth. Even though the circumstances aren't necessarily built around positive things. So in every single police building that we have around our city, there's a large poster that's titled Who We Are, and it outlines things like our values and expectations and procedural justice, how we treat people, so that our officers, every time they walk out of that building, they're being reminded of what our culture is, how they are expected to engage with our community. And I think that's very helpful for that reminder. But I also really love creating moments of engagement. We do this through things like our school resource officer program, which most agencies have, certainly large agencies. And we're very purposeful about selecting the officers that go into these schools. As a matter of fact, the school themselves, each individual school that's going to have a school resource officer, helps with the selection of their officer, so that we're really looking at the culture of that school and what their needs are. And I think that's important. And one of my favorite things is my youth advisory council, where I meet with multiple kids from all over the region, high school kids, and we meet on a monthly basis throughout the year. And it's a 2-year program, and they interact with us. So they learn about the police department. They have little programs that they can go into their school and talk about the police. But really, more importantly, we get to talk with them and understand what they're thinking. What are their concerns? What are their fears, and how can police really help with that? And just build the specific engagement with our youth and our community is really important for police, so that we're seen as a trusted entity and not somebody to be feared.
Great. Thank you so much, Chief Vasquez. Carla, can you talk to us about viewing this health promoting relationships paradigm through the lens of an educator? And you've been a classroom teacher and an administrator, and you're a coalition leader, so you're bringing a lot of different lenses to this. What are your thoughts?
Similar to parenting, when you're an educator, you have the ability to build up or tear down with your words, with your actions, when you engage with students and with young people. And as a classroom teacher and as in all of my roles in schools, whether that's working with fellow teachers or as coalition leader, but just in all of my work, I just think a lot about what we're building, but what we're building together. So something that we really try to do at my school and in my classroom is to just empower students to be a part of our community, and to seek connection, intentionally seek connection. So we've built a lot of programs in order to allow students to do that. So when I think about on a classroom level, in terms of just building up or building things together, building spaces for connection together, I just had a young man named David who's a 9th grader, and he said anytime he feels joy, he feels a sense of belonging. And I thought that was so remarkable to come from a 14-year-old young man. And so I think a lot about how I can cultivate joy in my classroom and in spaces in schools, because the world is hard and can be ugly no matter your background. Students, young people, their phones are saturated with violence and a lot of really difficult things. So I think anytime we can be really intentional about making space for joy and connection, it can only build young people up.
Fantastic. And Dr. Cooper, from the lens of someone who has studied evidence-based parenting and family strengthening programs, and as a parent yourself, what are your thoughts?
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, I'm really thinking about this question in my role as a parent to a very adventurous, fun-loving 8-year-old son who also has ADHD. He's struggled his whole life with impulsivity and emotion regulation challenges. And so I struggle really in how I best can support him. So I've experienced how hard parenting can be. I make mistakes every day. And especially when I'm feeling stressed and overwhelmed by life. So what I love about the focus of today's discussion about the information we've been learning and what is contained in the playbooks that you all have access to now is that it reminds us that even when we're feeling overwhelmed, when we feel like we're not our best as parents or as humans, we can take solace in the fact that small things can make a big difference. So I feel like a good example of that, and something that's been stressed throughout today's sessions, is that subtle shifts in how we use language and the routine ways we use language to reinforce our values and beliefs to youth in our lives is really valuable and important and impactful. So I'm just going to share one example that has kind of organically developed with me and my son James. So as I said, he can be hard to engage because he is all over the place sometimes, a little inattentive. And so I have come up with little phrases that we use with each other that just capture his attention. And so it's really simple. And again, it just kind of evolved over time. I wanted to be able to express in somewhat random ways that I love him, that I appreciate him. So I'll just use the phrase, guess what? And of course, at first, when you hear guess what, you say what? That's your like immediate reaction. And that was his too. And I would just say, I love you. And that was it. And so over time now it's kind of a game between the two of us. Like, can I catch him off guard and say, guess what? And he still says what? But now he's good about saying, or he'll like catch me and say, I'll say, guess what? He says, I love you, Mom. I say, I love you too. So it's just this little tiny trick, kind of a fun way to engage him and get his attention. And this looks different for every kid. So figuring out kind of what language, what routine way you can integrate this just in everyday interactions, I feel like is really valuable. Another thing that I've found really important, as I said, I feel like, as a parent, we can become very easily overwhelmed, and it can be hard to regulate our own emotions when we're in really challenging parenting moments. And so when I get angry, I have a hard time myself just regulating and reminding myself to reinforce some of these beliefs and values. And so another phrase that I've used with him over and over again is, in these moments where we're struggling with one another, even when I'm angry, I love you and you matter to me. And I can always rely on that, even when I'm feeling dysregulated, to be able to express that to him. And what's been so awesome and beautiful about this is now he does this back to me. So when he's feeling angry, he says, Mom, even when I'm angry, I love you and you matter to me. And so it's just this really lovely connection that we've built, and little small, subtle, routine ways that we kind of integrate this into our everyday interactions. And I think that's really what's what's beautiful about all of this, right? These things are not rocket science, like we've talked about. They're simple, they're not necessarily easy, but there are ways that we can integrate that into our everyday way of being with youth in our lives.
That's fantastic. Thanks so much, Brittany. Yeah, as we heard earlier this morning, common sense isn't necessarily common practice, and part of that, in my own journey, as I've been exposed to this way of being and the ideas behind health promoting relationships, I've had to think about. I've recognized that I need to do some self-work. And at my age, old habits die hard. And so I have to, and new habits are hard won. So I'm wondering if any of you can offer your thoughts on what practices might we as individuals, anyone who's participating in this summit, who really feels that this material speaks to them, this idea of connection, and they want to begin to develop new habits for themselves. I love that example you gave, Brittany, about guess what? And I have a similar story I'm going to share in a minute, but. Does anyone want to offer any thoughts you have about little things that we might do as individuals to begin to work this way of being into our own lives?
I can offer a couple of thoughts if we want to go in the same order.
Sure.
Not that we have to, but so a couple of things. I really like the question that Laura mentioned this morning. What belief am I cultivating in this moment? That is a question that I'm trying to really get in the habit of asking myself. We had an incident recently where our youth coalition went out and did a workshop that they've worked really hard on. They've done quite a few of them, and they normally go spectacular, and everybody oohs and ahs over how fantastic they are. But this one went a little differently. There were just too many things that weren't as expected. And, we can all maintain a certain level of flexibility up to a point, and they kind of hit their limit and started to unravel. And I felt anxious for them. I felt protective. I felt a little embarrassed because I had talked them up so much, so I was going through all these things in my mind. And so when we debriefed after, I was like racing with thoughts, and I thought, okay, what belief do I want to cultivate? And so the first thing I did was I thought about empathy. And I said, listen, because that's one of our facilitators. And I said, everyone, including adults, gets nervous when they speak in public. Everyone, including adults, can unravel and have a bad moment. But the one that I really thought about the most that I love was the self-alignment, which is a different facilitator. That is one of my favorite facilitators. So they were very caught up in like what I thought and was I disappointed. And so I just said, look, your goal with this group is to be a change agent. So you did volunteer today. You did get out and go do something. They were on their fall break. I was like, not every student is volunteering on their fall break like you are. But yeah, it didn't go as well as normal. You guys kind of got in your feelings, and that's okay. So I asked them like, what were the challenges in remaining in the goal that you set for yourself for this workshop and what you wanted to accomplish? So kind of reminding them of not to be so caught up in like, what did everyone else think? Even though of course that's always a factor, or what did I think, but like, where did they go off the rails in terms of their own goals and their own vision for that day? And then how could they do that next time? And so, they were like, well, we have coping skills. We could have done that when we got really anxious, And so we talked through that. And then another one with the self-alignment that I've gotten into the habit with in our meeting. Sometimes, they're humans, they're teenagers. Sometimes they're not paying attention. On occasion, they're not being conducive to the group doing what it needs to do. So instead of trying to be negative and point out the behavior, I will say like, how can you show more leadership in this moment? how can you help us achieve our mission? Because I'm just thinking of that self-alignment constantly, and how can I bring them back into who they said they wanted to be? Not necessarily like, are they pleasing me, or, you know, but more like, are they meeting their own stated goals about the type of people that they're trying to develop into?
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. You're actually, I mean, you're bringing up so many aspects of the paradigm and so many of the topics that are covered in the toolkit. You know, one of the strategies that we're recommending is modeling this behavior, and by modeling this way of being, part of that involves our own vulnerability, being authentic ourselves, and being willing to let young people know that, you know, we're working on ourselves as well, and that all of these things don't always come naturally, and we're working together with them. It's a partnership for us to both, for the trusted adult and the young person, to partner in a growth mindset, right? Carla, I wonder if, you know, if you have experienced this in the classroom, in the school, this sort of back and forth where you're growing, you want them to grow.
Definitely. If I had $1 every time a parent of a teenager said to me, I don't know how you're a high school teacher, I would have many dollars. And now I have 2 daughters who are both high school students, and they actually attend my school. One is 16, one is 14. And so I think I might be in my most important stage of personal growth as a teacher, having 2 teenage daughters and watching what they experience on a daily basis as a young person, and all the pressures that they face as teenagers and as students. And Dr. Cooper, to speak to your point about having like the guess what, I have something similar that works really well in my classroom. And also in terms of trying to stay regulated as a teacher. It's very difficult, and the days are busy, and teaching is demanding, and you're making 1,000 decisions, and it's hard. And so when you're managing behaviors and putting out fires, and teenagers can be difficult, as we know, and sometimes our reaction is to feel annoyed or to get angry because we're humans. And so I really try to just take a breath and take a step back and ask students, and it has to be in a genuine way, but to just say, when I notice the student is off, maybe their head's down, maybe they seem like their temper is flaring, they've been really short or curt with a classmate or with me, they've been defensive, I'll just say, hey, are you okay? And that leads to so many opportunities to understand better what's happening with that student. I think when I was first into my career, my instinct was to redirect, or to maybe point out to a student how their behavior wasn't appropriate for a classroom setting, or whatever those like traditional conversations looked like. But as time went on, I realized that I wasn't going to be able to foster the type of relationship with my students that was required for learning and for community and connection in my classroom if I didn't fully understand what was going on with them. And so the "Are you okay?" question has led to a lot of meaningful interactions with my students. Some just students will write me notes and say, hey, I really thank you for just noticing something was wrong. And so just acknowledgement, and that a student is seen, that there is something going on with them. Sometimes they just want to know, they just want an adult to notice that they're off. It's also led to really other important, heavy things that they share. A former student I had 2 years ago came in and sat down, and we regularly exchange snacks. He'll bring me breakfast burritos, and I'll have an extra cookie that I'll give to him, and it's just sort of become our thing. And he sat down and he looked terrible, and it was in between class change, which was sort of an unusual time for him to be there. And I said, hey, are you okay? And he wasn't. And his father had been detained by ICE about 3 weeks ago, and they were awaiting an upcoming court date. So the things that you learn and the ways that you'll be able to advocate for your students or the young people in your lives just by asking them on a human level. A simple question can, in my opinion, it can be a game changer. And then you learn, I think, also about yourself and how you can best react and advocate in those moments.
Great, thank you. Chief Vasquez, you're you're in a leadership role, obviously, as the chief of police. You came up through the ranks in that department, and so you have a clear perspective of kind of what's going through the mind of a patrol officer. Can you speak to how you have how you've promoted this way of being or encouraged this way of being in across the whole department? When I saw all of the programs that your department has going, I thought, wow, this is a leader who is clearly communicating a vision for how law enforcement interacts with young people in a way that really prioritizes connection. Can you talk about how you have kind of communicated that priority across your department, and what opportunities there are for patrol officers in all of their interactions with young people in lots of different, very consequential events in their lives, either as suspects or offenders, or as victims or witnesses, or just in everyday interactions?
Well, thank you for that question. The police do play a very specific role in communities, and some of them, as you alluded to, can be very difficult. We have officers that are taking juveniles into custody for drive-by shootings and attempted murders and stealing motor vehicles, and they're all really sometimes very heavy situations. And I think first and foremost, the culture that I talked about, consistently from the newest patrol officer to every records and ID person, all the way up to me, we have to model that culture, and it truly is helping our officers understand the importance of the community. We are here to provide a safe community, and if you don't have that even feeling of safety, then the community really doesn't thrive. So making sure that is a priority for the organization, but you have to have a plan around that. You can't just hope that that's going to happen as your strategy. So for example, every large organization, every large police organization, and I'm sure other professions, we need more people. And the thought would be, we need as many officers out on the streets as possible, and that's true. But I keep a community relations cadre that their entire job, a sergeant, a community relations officer, my public information officer, my recruiter, all of those come together to form a team that truly just strategizes about how we're going to engage with our community, how we're going to go out to schools. They help me facilitate my youth advisory council, or all of the programs that you talked about, or even our SRO program, where we're very purposeful. Not just anybody gets to be an SRO. They have to go through a whole process of selection to make sure they're the right fit and want to engage with our youth. And I think having that plan in place is vital. And the last thing I would want to mention, because I could disband all those units, right? I could disband our SRO program. I could disband our public information community relations unit and put those officers out on the street, but it's too vital. The other thing, though, is you got to know your limitations. The police often, a lot is thrown on police officers. So we have mental health issues, you have addiction issues, the homelessness issues. A lot of those types of things are given to the police to handle. But I think as an organizational leader, I have to understand we have limitations. We can train around those things, but the panel that we have with us here today is a great example of experts in the field that really are more important or more fit to engage in those areas. So bringing them in and working with police departments so that they can help us engage on a more appropriate level, and so that we know who our resources are. So when we come into an issue, we can pull those resources in and truly help engage our youth. I think those are all very important things.
Great, thank you, Chief Vasquez. Panelists, you heard this morning, and you saw in the toolkit and in the playbooks that are part of the toolkit, one part of the strategy to develop and encourage and foster this way of being with youth relates to creating the environment to ensuring that before we even are having conversations, beyond just our words and actions, being intentional about and being aware of what is the environment like? How are young people experiencing the environment in which we're interacting with them? And so we can think of that, for in law enforcement, for example, if there's an interview room or something like that, or in a school, if there's a school resource officer, is there a space in the school building where the school resource officer can talk with youth that feels safe and that is a safe environment? We can think about what the classroom experience, the classroom environment looks like. Heather, I worked on some of these playbooks, and when I thought about coalitions, when I thought about creating an environment for youth and how youth experience the environment in a coalition context, I felt like, and I've worked on coalitions. I've been a member and board member of coalitions, so I had some experience, but I felt like I had to be a little more creative. Some of those setting the environment didn't come as naturally to me. Can you offer your thoughts and advice about how we create that conducive environment in the context of community coalitions?
Yeah, I mean, I think the coalition, whether it's a youth or adult coalition, is really kind of like a microcosm for how we want relationships to look. So, in a way, I feel like as the facilitator, I'm getting to model respect. I'm trying to model group decision making. I'm trying to make sure that if someone isn't speaking up, that I'm looking at them, acknowledging them, making sure they know they matter, what they have to say matters, and making space for them. So I feel like I'm hopefully trying to set the tone for that type of connection and type of like a way of being with each other, and that we discuss what our values are in terms of how we interact with each other, and then hopefully that equips their capacity as leaders to go out and to do that in their interactions when they're implementing strategy and when they're creating change, whether they're talking to like a policymaker or they're doing a workshop or they're speaking to parents or decision makers. Hopefully they are remembering like those ways of interacting when they're being out in the world themselves. So I think of that. I also think like you mentioned, kind of the two-way learning. Sometimes I think it is important to ask them for help. Even last Monday at our meeting, there was one of our members was drawing, which we are allowed to do. We have a norm that like if you need to move your hands or body, it's fine as long as you're present and interacting. But it was such an overstimulating meeting for me. I was having trouble, and I said, look, you're not violating the rules. This is allowed, and I know you're listening, but can you help? It would help me. Are you able to make eye contact with me? Because I'm having trouble being present right now. So, and she did, and I was like, oh, thank you. I said, it's just been a long day, and I'm having trouble getting my brain on the track that we need it to be. So, yeah, I think it's just hopefully a microcosm, and I don't want it to be a place that's authoritarian and then they go out and we ask them to be egalitarian if we're not modeling that and being that in those moments. So it's kind of the microcosm.
Great. Any of the other panelists, if you want to offer any thoughts about, this idea of creating the environment and anything that struck you from the presentations this morning, or the material in the toolkit or the playbooks?
Well, I'll share a little bit. I think you can think of environment in several different ways. And I think, Heather, your examples were really great and kind of speak to how I have been thinking about environment as the culture and the climate that we create, just as much as like the physical environment. And so I guess this sort of connects also to my thoughts about how we can build these climates in our organizations, in the systems in which youth interact. So obviously, what I love about all of this discussion, these ways of being, is that it applies not just to relationships with the youth we work with, but all relationships, including our relationships with one another, with other adults on our team and in our organization. So I think by being more intentional about integrating these strategies, these ways of asking questions, being fully present into our teams, our adult teams even, can help build that organizational way of being, of feeling seen and heard and valued as professionals first, so that we can be present and available and enable these skills in youth as well. So really that first step toward building these health promoting systems or organizations for ourselves, so that we can do that also for the youth that we work with. And it can be, again, small things. Like I really appreciate Heather's examples in coalition meetings of trying to model that and integrate that. I can think of that too with my team meetings with my other researchers that I work with, or the students that I work with on campus, and being present and integrating some of those ways of asking questions and reflecting and modeling, and that being a real key component to building this in others, is that we have to really start with ourselves. So I really appreciate that about the toolkit as well, starting with some of that self-reflection and building that, and starting with understanding that this is not just for youth, it's just as important for adults, and maybe even more important in some cases.
If I can offer maybe from a law enforcement perspective, there's sort of two different, I guess, areas that I think about when I think about this question. And first is a more formal sort of setting, right? So maybe we have a young child who needs to be interviewed for something that happened to them. So we create offsite locations. So they're not coming to a police department, they're going to an offsite location that's really, it's got toys, it's got things they can play with, it's got a much less serious setting, so that we can bring our forensic interviews, who are very specialized in how they engage with youth, and are very expert in that. So we try to create that environment from a law enforcement perspective to make them much more comfortable in very tough situations. But also, I think it's important from an environmental perspective for law enforcement to engage at times when it's not about work. And a great example of that is we have the Deaf and Blind School here in Colorado Springs. And we do every year with them, we go out, we send officers, and they do goal ball. And if you've never seen goal ball, please YouTube it, because what officers end up having to do is put blindfolds on. And it's kind of like soccer. They're on their knees, and the only thing they can do is hear this ball. So their sight is taken away from them. And they get to engage with all the students in this school in that environment in a way that is on their turf, that we have to experience it through their senses, their sensations. Doing things like that, and the engagement that we have through programs like Play COS, where officers carry balls, different types of sports balls with them in their car, so that they can stop at a park and go out and just start talking to kids, and being in that environment and just showing up in a way that's not really law enforcement related, I think is vital to the building of trust that our officers get to experience with the youth around the city.
Fantastic. I love all these examples, and again, as I think Laura described this morning, as we were going around the country presenting these youth prevention institutes and introducing this paradigm and these ideas, we invited a very broad audience, and that's who showed up. People saw the They saw what we were going to be talking about, and it connected with them. Relationships was the big word on the flyer that we sent out, and people saw that word. And they saw the graphic on the cover or on the flyer that showed adults interacting with teens, and something just in that word relationships and the picture connected to them, whatever field they were working in, and they decided they wanted to come and spend 2 days with us. And as we shared this material with them, they started reaching out to us and telling us about what they were thinking in terms of, and what they were wondering in terms of, how do I put this into practice in my own role? And that's what led us to develop these playbooks. And the playbooks are, they're an important part of the overall toolkit. And they're a catalyst to begin thinking about and discussing that question. How would I bring this to life in the context of my role in my profession, in law enforcement, in education, in community coalitions? We don't have a coach on the panel, but we developed a playbook for coaches, because we recognized and we heard from participants in the institutes that was an important role, and we saw it as an important role. And you're all here. You were invited to speak on this panel because you're people that we all have connections with here at ADAPT. We know you all. We have relationships with you all, and we recognize that this isn't completely foreign thinking to you, that you're already leaning into this space in different ways. But if you could think about, in the roles that each of the roles that you represent, if you could think about, what message might you send to other people in that role or that profession, about how they could begin to adopt this sort of at an organizational or a systems level. We've recognized how much in this paradigm and in the toolkit shows us that we have our own personal individual work to do. But what struck us in developing and refining this material, what struck us was how important, how critical it is that it not just be one or two people within an organization or a school or an agency or a system who are really leaning into this and leading in this way of being. But if it begins to not be if it begins to not be something different, if it begins to look like, well, this is just the way the whole organization operates or the whole system operates, what would you offer others in each of your roles, in each of your fields? Carla, could we start with you with education?
Sure. When I was working in school administration, after COVID, and schools were a difficult place to return to and reestablish norms. But one of the most rewarding parts of that job that I got to do upon our return was to help rewrite our mission statement. And of course, this was a school-wide effort. But I think at that time, we really decided to commit to walk the talk. If you walk around my school, our slogan is "We are Spring Mills," but there are signs everywhere that say we are inclusive, we are loved, we are valued. And that truly is the shared belief and value of our staff and of our community. And it's also aspirational. It's the place that we want to build for our students and for their families. And it was incredibly difficult work, but important work. And if we had programs or practices that didn't align with those values, we revised them or we got rid of them. It also led to many new projects, organizations, student organizations, resources to be added to what we already had. So we are a traditional public school in many senses, but I like to think that we have done a good job at thinking about our student body and our community and their needs, and really trying to live the values of seeing our school as an inclusive place where we love our students and we value them and they feel those things. So the most recent thing that we did in order to do that was to give our student body, we have 1,600 students, an hour-long lunch period called Cardinals Connect. It's where we offer all of our clubs and tutoring time. So it's both academic and social. Students can play basketball, they can go outside and play football. They can meet one-on-one with their teachers if they need academic support. We have a school therapy dog. We've worked with a lot of different community organizations to get outside mentors, therapists, just different programs to help supplement and support what we can do as a public school. So at the time when we rewrote this, it seemed, again, it's a lofty idea. It's something that we're still striving towards every day. But I just think it's so important as a school to identify your values and then build from the values that you agree upon and believe in.
Fantastic. Thank you. Chief Vasquez, I don't know what opportunities you have or even your level of interest or opportunity to influence other police chiefs throughout Colorado or across the country. Is there a piece of advice that you could offer to other law enforcement leaders that might help them begin to take a step in this direction if they're not already there?
Yeah, I think when I think of that question, I really believe that it has to be important to me first. I really sort of started down this road of community engagement. I remember sort of, I use the word force, but I really do enjoy it. When I was a commander, I was kind of given this community engagement program called the Illumination Project, and it was the citywide sort of program to engage with the entire community. And that really got me thinking about how you build these programs. And the bottom line is the organization, the head of the organization. I've got, we're the largest city in Colorado, and there's 24/7, 365-day operation that's happening out there. And so how do you make sure that your entire organization understands how important this is to you? So I think first and foremost, it must be, from the top down, a priority. And you have to have people watching it. You have to make sure, I think you mentioned, you can start creeping away from these priorities, and you're always having to get back in realignment and make sure people understand that this is nothing new. This is still important to the organization. And here's how we're going to do it, and engage your folks to come up with great ideas on how we might be able to do that, because I have a lot of really smart people in this organization, and they have a lot of great ideas, and I love hearing them so that we can keep ourselves on track with what's happening today, not what was happening 10 years ago, 5 years ago, or even last year. So it has to be important to the organization, and I think just bringing the right people together, not only internal to the organization, but experts outside of the organization to help devise these plans can be really beneficial just to kick it off.
Super. Well, I don't know how many questions have been coming in through the Q&A but Laura has been monitoring those and sort of maybe condensing them into some themes. So I want to invite Dr. Peppard to come up and join me here and share some Q&A with us.
All right, thank you, Brian, and thank you, panelists. Wow. I've just been sitting over there soaking it all up as well, and really just being fully present with your material and trying to make sense of it in the work that we do as well. One thing that came through that I just want to mention was there was a question around, and I'm going to read this out loud. I understand the strategies you're describing, but I've noticed that students from different socioeconomic backgrounds often experience varying levels of trauma, which can show up as behavioral challenges in cases where classroom management isn't strong, how do we effectively apply these prevention practices? So I'd like for you to respond that in a way with whoever makes sense. But before that, I do want to just highlight on the same link where you're accessing the toolkit for health promoting relationships, there also are other tools, and you'll see a tool in there called School-Based Prevention Guide. And within that tool, you'll see a description of a tiered approach or a comprehensive prevention strategy within school. So I do just want to draw your attention to that extra resource. Okay. How do we effectively apply prevention practices in cases where classroom management is not strong and you have students from varying levels of trauma that you're working with?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So I think it's twofold. One is teachers really need support in professional development. They need just reliable resources to help them just develop more tools for classroom management. So some of this is just getting good professional development into the hands of teachers and giving them access to it. The other is it's long and slow work, working with students with trauma. I know there are lots of communities, ours is one of them at the Martinsburg Initiative. They offer trauma-informed educator training. I think things like that are really great. But just on the practical day-to-day, and this includes my own classroom, some students are really hard to develop. It's hard for them to develop trust with someone. So I think writing opportunities, reflection opportunities, one-on-one conferencing, just check-ins with them. Anytime I can learn about just like their interests. What music are you into? You know, noticing their choice. Maybe it's a student who's into fashion, just finding that personal link to them. Sometimes we have food together in our classroom just to take the academics off the table and just be people together. I really just try to think about any way. We'll have board game day. I'm looking at a stack of board games in my classroom, but just any way to find a link to the students in my classroom. And really, and this may sound a little too sentimental, but I have to make a choice to love every student in the room and treat it like our own little family. And so when the family is not functioning well, when we're not cohesive, when we're not connected, our classroom isn't gonna do what it needs to do. So it's difficult, it's slow work, it's long work, and teachers need support. Not an easy answer, I know.
Thank you, Carla. We are at time, but considering the other questions that have come in, I want to draw your attention to two specific places within the toolkit for health promoting relationships. The first one is several people have asked, where are these playbooks? So to orient you to that in the toolkit, they are beginning on page 48 is an introduction to the playbooks, and then you have your specific ones in the page numbers affiliated with those in the table of contents. A couple have also asked about varying things with different factors of individuality and background, gender, race, culture, levels of trauma, behavioral health conditions, neurodivergence. All of that is addressed in a way that we could address it within this toolkit in the limited number of pages. We've got a section called individuality and background underneath. It's a subsection underneath reaching the full potential of relationships. That's on page 40. And it is not the most comprehensive response to some of your questions, but it is a great starting point. Individuality and background is on page 40 for understanding differences, connecting through differences, and at least starting to think through some of these concepts. So that's the best we can do right now because we're going to be closing out and transitioning to our next session, but I'll let you close out.
Thanks so much, Laura. And again, I just want to thank our panelists you've all been so kind and gracious and generous with your time and sharing your expertise and ideas with us. One last, two quick last plugs. One is there's also, because the idea of adopting this and promoting it within an agency or organization can feel a little overwhelming. We've included an organizational action planning tool. Page 69, thank you, Laura. Page 69 in the toolkit, an organizational action planning tool to just maybe put some structure around it that begins with some self-reflection questions about reflecting on the organization or the system or the culture. And then moving from there into identifying gaps and needs and prioritizing, just choosing a place to start. And the last plug I want to give real quick is to mention again, as Laura described this morning or before lunch, you know, we're creating this. We're trying to create a group, a national group of ambassadors who want to just lean in and learn more about this and get more training. So there is a QR code there is a there will be a QR code, a way for you to sign up to say, yes, I want to be part of this. I want to learn more personally. I want to become maybe an ambassador for my role or my profession or my system or organization. So I encourage people to sign up that way and express their interest. So with that, I'm going to close this session, and I think we're going into no, we're not going into a short break. We're going to move into our next keynote with Dr. Jody Kamen, who's going to talk about applying the paradigm in the context of treatment. So stick around.